In a quiet U as a diner, a loud bully slapped a single dad, never realizing the calm man he hit was a former Delta Force legend. What happened next shocked everyone. Like, share, and subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. The sun had just begun to rise over the small town of Maple Ridge, casting a warm golden glow across the frosty windows of the Maple Ridge Diner. Inside, the smell of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air as early morning customers settled into their booths. Luke Carter, a quiet single dad with tired eyes, but a calm presence, sat near the corner window with his 8-year-old daughter, Ava. Luke wore an old flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up slightly to keep syrup off them, revealing a faded tattoo near his forearm. Most people never noticed it, and Luke liked it that way. Ava giggled as she drenched her pancakes in maple syrup, her little feet swinging beneath the booth. Luke smiled gently, grateful for these peaceful moments. Life hadn't been easy since Ava's mother passed, but Luke made sure his daughter never felt the weight he carried inside. His tattoo, a symbol only known to those who served alongside him, marked his years in Delta Force. Years filled with missions nobody spoke about. In this small town, he was simply Ava's dad, a mechanic, a quiet man who kept to himself. And that's all he ever wanted. The diner's door suddenly swung open with a loud bang, making a few customers jump. Rick Morgan, a well-known local troublemaker, stomped inside. His leather jacket was half-zipped, his boots muddy, and his face twisted with irritation. The staff exchanged nervous glances. Rick always brought chaos wherever he went. Muttering complaints, he shoved past two elderly men and slammed his fist on the counter because his usual seat was taken. His eyes scanned the room, landing on Luke's tattoo. A smirk crept across his face. Rick loved finding targets. Rick swaggered to Luke's table and leaned over, invading the calm bubble father and daughter were enjoying. "Nice tattoo." He scoffed loudly, making sure others heard. "Where'd you get it?" "Some cheap shop online." Luke kept highsies on Ava, refusing to react. Rick hated being ignored. "I'm talking to you, old man." AA's fork paused midway to her mouth, sensing the tension. Luke placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. He didn't want trouble. Not in front of his daughter. Not today. Not ever. But Rick's pride couldn't handle silence. Fueled by frustration and the desire to impress whoever might be watching, Rick suddenly slapped Luke across the face. A sharp, loud hit that echoed through the diner. Gasps filled the room. A waitress rubbed a plate. AA's eyes widened in terror, her small hands trembling as she reached for her dad. Luke didn't move for a long second. He simply breathed steady and controlled like a man who'd faced far worse than a slap from a loudmouthed bully. Slowly, Luke lifted his gaze, meeting Rick Sayez with a calmness so chilling the diner fell completely silent. Rick didn't realize it yet, but he had just crossed a line he should never have touched. Rick's smirk faded when Heffinelli noticed the look in Luke Carter's eyes, calm, unblinking, and colder than anything he'd ever seen. It was an anger. It wasn't fear. It was the steadiness of a man who had walked through war zones and survived things Rick couldn't imagine. Luke didn't rush to react. He simply placed a hand on the table, making sure Ava was safe beside him. The diner stayed silent. Every customer frozen in anticipation, nobody breathed. Ava tugged gently at her dad's sleeve, whispering, "Daddy, please." Luke gave her a small, reassuring nod before slowly standing up. Rick tried to cover his sudden unease with a shaky laugh. "What? You going to cry or want to try something?" He taunted, but his voice betrayed him. Luke didn't speak. He stepped around the booth with a precise, controlled movement. Nothing flashy, nothing aggressive, just steady. Rick swung again, but before anyone could blink, Luke caught his wrist effortlessly, stopping the punch midair. Gasps broke out. Rick's eyes widened. Luke applied pressure, not enough to injure, just enough to remind Rick that strength didn't always look loud. Rick dropped to a knee from the pain, his confidence collapsing. At that exact moment, Sheriff Daniels, who had been quietly eating breakfast in a back booth, stood up. "That's enough," he announced in a firm voice that carried through the diner. Everyone knew the sheriff respected Luke deeply, though few knew why. Daniels walked over, hand on his holster, eyes locked on Rick. "You just assaulted a decorated veteran," he said, his tone sharp. Rick stammered. I didn't know." The sheriff shook his head. "Maybe you should think before laying hands on people." He looked at Luke. "You okay?" Luke gave a small nod, still calm, still steady, still in control of himself. Luke released Rick's wrist gently, not wanting things to escalate further. The bully collapsed backward, clutching his arm, breathing hard. The sheriff pulled out handcuffs. "Rick Morgan, you're under arrest for assault." That Rick's face turned pale as the sheriff turned him around. "Sheriff, come on." I didn't even fight back. Rick protested weakly. "And that's exactly why you're lucky," the sheriff replied. "If he had fought back, you'd be on a stretcher." The sheriff wasn't exaggerating. Anyone with experience could see it. Luke had moved with the precision of a man who had once been trained to neutralize threats in seconds. As Rick was led out of the diner, the customers broke into quiet applause. People nodded at Luke with respect, but Luke simply placed a hand on Ava's back, guiding her gently into their booth again. Her eyes were still wide, but she managed a small smile. "Daddy, you didn't even get mad?" she whispered, admiration shining through her worry. Luke brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. "Because real strength," he said softly, "is knowing when not to use it." Ava hugged him tightly. Around them, the diner returned to life. But everyone who witnessed the moment would never forget the day a bully slapped a quiet single dad without knowing he was standing in front of a Delta Force legend.